Thanks for coming, everybody, and really appreciate the invitation to speak here. We're going to spend some time talking about sustainability in fisheries, and I can think of no better room to be in to do that. So really looking forward to the conversation. My last academic seminar was almost 23 years ago to the day at my master's defense. So I just want to make sure that they're still doing it the same way. So the point is to speak for the full hour and forget to leave time for questions. Is that how it works? Yeah. Okay, great. And just to give you a sense of how long ago that was, Tobey Maguire was Spider-Man, and you got Netflix through the mail. Ray, thank you very much for the introduction and the background. Before we get started, I just wanted to sort of describe this photo a little bit, which is kind of how I like to think about sustainability, especially sustainability in the sort of corporate fishing and seafood context. And that is, it's kind of messy. It's never as easy as you think it should be. But if you look at it from the right angle, it's actually pretty cool. Just to give you a primer on American Seafoods, we're based here in Seattle. We own and operate 7 catcher processor vessels. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that is in a second. But these are sort of marvels of engineering. They're all based here at Terminal 91 when they're not fishing. Actually, we just finished up a season for pollock. Most of the boats are on their way down, if not 1 or 2 of them here already. And they are high volume, high efficiency platforms that do a bunch of things really well. Anyone ever been on one before? You don't count. Great. So this just sort of gives you a cutaway of what one of these boats does. So think of this boat as 3 or 4 different boats all sort of mashed into one thing, right? So we have a hotel up in the top that houses about 130 crew. Beneath that, you have the fishing deck, which is handling all the gear operations, shooting the nets, bringing fish on board, etc. Beneath the fishing deck, you have a pretty large factory that is split into two lines, essentially. One line is for making frozen fillets. The other line is for producing surimi or fish paste, or what you usually would have in your California roll, and things like that. Beneath that is a 1,000 to 1,500 ton metric freezer. It's pretty much the size of a Trader Joe's. And then behind that, you have the engine room and a separate factory that takes all the trimmings from the factory and turns them into fish meal and fish oil. So it's important to point out one of the real fundamentals of sustainability in our industry, which is that every part of these fish that we're harvesting have value. Some things more than others, but the size of our vessels and the way that they've been laid out allows us to use every single bit of protein and fat and other materials that come with these fish. Just to talk a little bit more about the products we make, and I should also acknowledge there are some other colleagues from other similar companies in the audience. So I'm going to be talking a lot about American Seafoods, but a lot of these things are sort of similar across our industry, companies like Trident and Arctic Storm. So any of the hard questions for me, I'm just going to send them over to them. So frozen fillets, things that go into fish sticks and McDonald's filet of fish sandwich. If you've ever eaten one of those, chances are good that us or one of the other companies in this room caught it. Surimi, this is a very, very malleable kind of fish paste. It's made from, it's basically all the parts of the muscle that are not big pieces of fillets. A lot of people think it's like fake seafood, or it's not real fish. Very much is. Most of that market is for Asia, and fish meal and oil we use both for aquafeed and for pet food. Roe is kind of a specialty product that we catch in the winter. And that's a luxury product that goes largely to Japan. That is probably the single most valuable thing that we catch. So my boss wants me to use my time today to tell you how great American Seafoods is, and I'm certainly going to give you a healthy dose of that. But again, a lot of these initiatives that we're going to talk about are things that happen at the industry level, either because of the regulatory environment or because we as a sector have recognized the value of voluntary initiatives being needed above all the sort of things that we're required to do. So let's jump right in. Does anyone want to tell me what their definition of a sustainable fishery is? I kind of figured that. So if I'm counting, there's probably about 30 people in the room. I'm guessing we would probably have 28 or 30 definitions of a sustainable fishery. And one of the things I wanted to talk about today is, where do we set those boundaries, right? Because I'm sure many of the folks in here are professors or grad students or researchers who are intimately studying fisheries science and ecology and management and all of the things that we traditionally think about in terms of how do we end up with a sustainable fishery, whether it's pollock or crab or sardine or salmon or whatever. But just to help me sort of understand who's in the room, and since this is my first time doing this, raise your hand if you're a professor. Okay, grad student. You guys are all sitting in the back. Good job. Researcher or postdoc. Okay. In the fishing industry, I think I know this answer. You wandered into the wrong room. Just waiting for happy hour. All right, good. So I just like everyone to keep this in the back of your heads over the course of the next 30 minutes or so as we go on this trip down sustainability lane. But I think it's really important to acknowledge that everyone is going to have a different definition, right? And depending on what your background is, or what your research expertise is, or whether you're an academic or a nonprofit or a corporate or whatever, you might come at this from a different place and think that, well, if it's managed by NOAA, great, done. Let's crack open the beers. Or you might think, well, we really need independent third-party verification. We need an MSC or a Seafood Watch that's sort of unaffiliated with the process or the fishery to sort of give it that stamp of approval. And those are all fine. And I think, we've been involved in programs like this for a long time, as I know many of you have. And I put this in the blurb for the poster, but I think at a base level, we can all sort of agree that if you have a healthy stock and you have acceptable ecosystem impacts, however that's defined, and you have a robust and responsive management system, that you're doing pretty good, right? And I think that's what we definitely pride ourselves on in the US, is having that in most places for our fisheries, and that's an example for other fisheries around the world. So maybe just to dive into that a little more deeply, everything that we take credit for, in, sustainability in our industry and in the company, it really does all start with management and science. And it's really hard to do any of the things that we're going to talk about later if we don't have those things. So American Seafoods is concentrated exclusively in pollock in Alaska and hake off the Oregon and Washington coast. So I'm going to be talking mostly about those two fisheries, right? In Alaska, we have a very large bank account to draw from. We have adult biomass over 10 million metric tons many years. We're harvesting on average about 15% of that. The TAC is always around 1.3 million metric tons, plus or minus 150,000. It is a very reliable fishery. It is a very well-studied fishery. It is a very well-managed fishery. And we definitely benefit from that. Now, American Seafoods and Trident and Arctic and all these other companies, we participate in, the council process, all the advisory committees, et cetera. No one company is making this fishery sustainable. I think we as an industry are proud of the fact that we all sort of join forces and help push it to be as good as it can be. But without NOAA, without UW, without academic science and all these other components, we would not benefit the way that we do. And generally the same can be true for hake. Hake is a little bit of a more finicky fishery. The fish are often harder to find, or they some years they just don't show up at all. They're also managed jointly with Canada, which is another thing that I won't really get into. But we see a lot of the same trends. Adult biomass is healthy. Last year, I think we only caught about 6% of the biomass because a lot of the fish never made it north of California, and we're not allowed to fish in California. So from a corporate perspective, last year was a really shitty year for hake, but we're hoping that it's going to come back to normal level this year, and we'll find out in about a month when the spring hake season starts. I did just want to talk about bycatch, especially for pollock and even so for hake, as that is such a timely topic, and one that I think is always the pressure point that we get in terms of our sustainability credentials. We are at about 1% unintended or non-target catch in our pollock fishery, which if you were to compare us to trawl fisheries or just any fisheries really around the world, 1% is pretty good. But when you extrapolate 1% across 1.3 million tons, that's a number that some people and stakeholders are uncomfortable with. I think another thing that we're trying to push ourselves towards at American Seafoods is this idea of uncomfortable transparency. And in an era when everyone can get everything on the internet, whether it's true or not, this is an area where we've really decided to say, listen, this is our level of performance. We're reporting this every year publicly through our cooperatives to NOAA and the council, et cetera. Additionally, here's what we're doing as a company. So this is a table that's taken from our annual sustainability report, and we're telling you exactly how much of what we caught, and we're proud of that performance. We know others will look at it and say, well, look how much this is. But I think it's always better to have information and provide it rather than have it and somebody knows that you have it, but you're not actually, releasing it. So this is in our sustainability report every year. You can look it up. Again, it's not really anything different than what we send to the council and through the cooperative reports, but this is on one page, and the cooperative reports, I've never gotten past the second or third page of this. Everything we catch is third-party certified, 100% traceable. Again, we have the luxury of only fishing in the US. We only fish in federally managed fisheries. We only employ people who are legal to work in the US. There's a lot of onlys that we're fortunate to have as part of our ecosystem and our sustainability story. There's a lot of things we have to do because of the Coast Guard. There's a lot of things we have to do because of OSHA, et cetera. We sort of have to do this because of Europe, right? Europe, which is a big market for us, requires, for the most part, for the types of products that we sell, they require a third-party eco-label. We've been engaged in these programs for 15 or 20 years. And again, we're proud of it. And everything we catch and process and sell has one of these. So this is one of the interesting questions. We have great management. We're third-party certified. We use 100% of our fish. There's a whole bunch of other things I'm going to talk about in the next couple of minutes, but is it enough? And what we've seen in the last few years is an explosion in especially legal activity that are going after companies for labeling things sustainable that they have one or more issues with. So ConAgra had a lawsuit for selling Russian pollock as sustainable. Bumblebee has been dinged for a number of things. I think I actually saw that there was a new suit that came out this week against Bumblebee. Red Lobster got sued for calling Maine lobster sustainable. Walmart got sued for calling pink salmon, Pacific cod, and pollock from Russia sustainable. Mowi, which is, I think, the world's largest farm salmon producer, got sued for the third-party eco-label that they use to call their product sustainable. Gorton's got sued for calling their tilapia sustainable. Aldi got sued for calling its farm salmon healthy when it had antibiotics in it, and on down the line. So I think we're starting to see an evolving landscape in the seafood industry where management is good but not enough. Third-party certifications are good but not enough. And then the question becomes, what are you going to do to go above and beyond these sort of foundational elements to kind of get your bona fides as high as you possibly can to protect against someone or somebody or something questioning you, whether it's in a legal setting or not. The less I have to think about that stuff, the better. But the fact, the reality is that it is in the back of a lot of our minds right now. So if we've talked a little bit about what a sustainable fishery is, now we can get into some of these additional things about what is a sustainable fishing company. And again, just to sort of toot our own horn a little bit, but again, many of these things will be similar for the other folks that are sitting in the room here. We operate in the largest certified food fishery in the world. We use every piece of fish that comes over the rail. We are 100% third-party certified and traceable. We have a 99% target catch rate. Our cold storage is all free on free. We don't use any fresh water. We don't occupy any land that could be used for food production. When we produce too much fish oil to store on board, we use it to power our steam boilers. Our carbon footprint is lower than tofu. We do really kick-ass net recycling that Noelle and Emma are going to join in on this year. Carbon and packaging accounting every year, the highest level of social certification for our crew, and on and on. Is that enough? I don't know. We're going to do that, and we're going to do more also. So I put this up because like many of you, I studied as a marine ecologist in school. That's how I started my academic career before I realized that there were only like 3.5 shark jobs in the world, and I probably wasn't going to get one of them. I didn't go to school for CSR or ESG or even sustainability. I never took an environmental policy class. So a lot of this stuff is kind of learning on the job. But what's interesting here is a lot of these terms get thrown around interchangeably. And from an academic standpoint, they are all a bit different. But for example, like I'm the only sustainability person in American Seafoods, and the expectation is that I know and do everything CSR, ESG, sustainability, social responsibility, like anything that anyone could possibly think is related to one of these things sort of lands on my desk. And I think some other folks in the audience would probably have similar experiences. But what's funny about this is if you just Google ESG and CSR and sustainability and you just do an image search, you basically get all these images that say ESG is the center and CSR is on the left and sustainability is on the right. But no, sustainability is really in the middle. And in this situation, ESG is over here. It doesn't matter, right? Just like you all have different sustainability, sustainable fisheries definitions, everybody will describe each one of these terms a little bit differently. And really at the end of the day, as we think about what we should or shouldn't be doing, it's, can we do it? Is it impactful? How are we going to make it happen? And if it's labeled, if it has a 3-letter acronym attached to it, great, but who really cares? But just to check some of these boxes, carbon and plastic and transparency, and there's 4 or 5 issues that not only all of us in the fishing and seafood industries are dealing with, but food production more generally are all dealing with. How it gets applied in a fisheries context, is a little bit different, but for the most part, we burn a lot of fuel and we have a big carbon footprint. And again, we are getting better measuring that every year. We have full carbon scope 1, 2, and 3 accounting now, which we've had for the last couple of years. Unlike most companies, which have most of their carbon emissions in their supply chain, we are responsible for most of our own carbon emissions because we operate big diesel-powered boats, both for the fishing and for getting product to market, right? So the good thing about that is we are in control of our own destiny. The bad thing about that is that we don't have a lot of great alternatives for diesel that are sort of mission ready right now. We're doing some nibbling around the edges, which I'll talk about in a little bit, but short of renewing our fleet and building all new state-of-the-art catcher processors, we're sort of at the mercy of the shipping market and the fuel market there while they figure out whether it's going to be hydrogen or methanol or LNG or whatever. So we are ready to go, but our hands are somewhat tied in how we do that today. Not that this is super interesting, but this is what our carbon profile looks like. About 50% of our carbon emissions come from our fishing, the fuel burned in our fishing boats. Another 25% or so from the cargo, the trampers that take our frozen product to market all around the world. About 50% of our products go to Asia, 35 to Europe, and 15 to 20% in North America. After the first 2 or 3 categories, it gets real small very quickly. But interestingly, before we started doing this, I was surprised to find out how much packaging contributed, how much just the food that we feed our crew on the boats contributes. We have, when all 7 boats are fishing, we are feeding 1,000 people 4 meals a day for 9 months of the year. That's about 5% of our carbon footprint. So we could actually reduce that number if we offered less red meat. Are we going to do that? I don't know. I'm not going to go die on that hill just yet. But it gives you a sense of like, okay, if there's no new fuel out there, how are we going to reduce our carbon footprint this year or next year? So packaging, groceries, additives, there's a few things that have to get added to the surimi to give it sort of stability, and to give it the right texture and consistency that the Asian market wants. That's mostly sugar. And so we're using huge amounts of sugar from Southeast Asia to go into surimi. And again, like, do we use a different ingredient? Do we get it from a different place? All these sorts of things start to rattle around in your brain about how do you get the bottom number of the spreadsheet down wherever you can. But if you look at our carbon intensity, which is essentially how much carbon we use to make a certain unit of product, whether that's a pollock fillet or fish meal and oil or a hake block or something like that, we're around 1.4, 1.5 kilos of carbon equivalents per kilo of product. And that is one of the lowest protein carbon footprints on the planet, other than like dried beans and a couple of other things. If you're a climate conscious eater, then seafood in general, but especially whitefish from this part of the world, is about as good as you can do. And I'm going to just say right out front that I stole this from Ray. This is one of our favorite ways that we convey this to certain kinds of audiences. We're about 2 to 3 times less carbon than Impossible Burger. And as I said before, no fresh water, no arable land. Yeah, so anyway, you get the picture. Just going to plastic and packaging for a minute. We are we sell products that like everything else in the world, now has microplastics in it. And so this is an issue that is certainly near and dear to our hearts. As we don't want this to affect the business, but we're grappling with all the packaging and plastic things that you would think of, right? We use plastic packaging to keep our products safe and quality, and just to protect them in transit, and all those sorts of things. But we also know that we need to reduce it wherever we can. And quality assurance people would like us to use the plastic packaging that we use, because that's how they've engineered it. And the logistics people say, well, if you can get the weight down by 8%, then we can get more pallets in the truck, or we can save on our fuel costs. Or the customers in Europe say, well, if it's too thin, then it breaks, and then we get plastic in the end products, and we don't want that. So this is where things get really kind of messy, which is which trade-offs are okay and which ones are not. And I think this is an area where we found we just have to keep plugging away at it, and especially work with our customers to find solutions in the middle that everyone can be happy with. Just to give you an example, so the surimi that we make on board goes into these 10-kilo blocks. It goes into a plastic bag, color-coded plastic bag. That plastic bag comes off a roll, kind of like a toilet paper roll, but about this big. And it's got two big plastic end caps on it to keep the spool from getting jammed up. And the surimi, the box that the surimi bags come in is thicker and better padded than the box that we put our frozen fillets in. And no one can say why, other than they wanted to get the packaging for the fillet box as thin as possible, but they never thought about, well, what about the packaging for all of our packaging? And we go through a lot of packaging. Here's a good example of that. So in Dutch Harbor, where we're fishing 6 months out of the year, offloading product, everything comes on pallets, everything is wrapped in cardboard and plastic, and the boats want to deal with none of that, right? So the supplies come to the dock, they get lifted onto the boat, they strip off all the stretch wrap and the strapping and the fiber, the cardboard corners and toppers and all that sort of stuff, and it goes onto the dock. And can anyone guess what kind of recycling they have in Dutch Harbor? Exactly. But we realized, like, it's necessary for getting this stuff there, but it's unlike the garbage that comes off the boat at the end of the trip. This stuff is super clean. It never really gets used. It just gets cut off, thrown back on the dock. And we realized all we really needed was a baler in the warehouse to take all this film and to take all this fiber. And instead of paying $400 a ton to throw it away in the ever shrinking landfill in Dutch Harbor, that if we just baled it and stuffed a container full of it and sent that container to Seattle when it was full on a boat that doesn't have any cargo coming from Dutch to Seattle, or very little, instead of paying $6,000 for a container to throw it away, we could spend $2,000 to bring it down here and earn $700 on the material by selling it to a recycler. So logistically, it kind of sounds stupid, but from a financial perspective, and especially a landfill in Dutch Harbor perspective, these are the sorts of things that we're trying to figure out, even if it makes the people in logistics crazy and super mad at me. Our other biggest plastic stream is our nets. And these are one of the most important tools that we have in our industry, but they're made almost exclusively of plastic. And we fish them for several years, and then they get wound up and put in a bundle and live in purgatory in a parking lot somewhere, or in a net yard in Dutch Harbor somewhere for 10 or 15 years. Used to be, it was much easier to send them to Asia for recycling. That's gotten a little harder now. But we really wanted to see what it would mean to sort of do this end of life operation domestically and get these plastics somewhere where they could be reused haven't really figured out how to put them back into fishing gear. But we have been able to come up with a program where we separate out all these different kinds of plastics, nylon, polypropylene, polyethylene, et cetera, and basically turn them into raw material and feedstock for other commercial plastic products. And we're going to do a big industry net recycling event at the end of May, which maybe you're all invited to. This is just another example of what this looks like in practice. So that picture on the left, pretty typical midwater trawl net that I don't know if you can see on the top. It's got a tree growing out of the top of it. So it's been laying around for a while. But we've done some testing and some experimenting and figure out what we can actually make these things into if we separate the plastics properly. We're trying to pitch McDonald's on this serving tray idea, which they're already doing in Scandinavia right now, but it would be pretty cool if they were serving a fillet of fish sandwich caught by our boats on a tray that was made from our nets. I think it's a slam dunk. The marketing people at McDonald's haven't gotten back to me yet, but we're going to keep trying. But again, just to say that we have a lot of different plastic streams in our business, and some of them are easier to recycle than others. The hardest part has just been finding local recyclers that handle these different types of material. And if it has any sort of contamination on it whatsoever, whether it's like a sugar residue or a fish meal residue or whatever, it could be perfectly recyclable material, but the contamination is a hurdle that we're still trying to get through. Just to spend a minute on kind of what we're looking at next. I mentioned fuel before. There is something out there called renewable diesel, which is essentially the truck and boat equivalent of sustainable aviation fuel. There's a big supply in California. There is very little in Washington, and there's absolutely none in Alaska. So right now it is, depending on which supplier you talk to, it's about 2 times the price if you can find it. A lot of that is subsidized by the various state carbon markets, which we don't totally qualify for because we don't operate in the state. So even if we bought something in Washington and burned it in the Bering Sea, we wouldn't get the full value of the credits, which financially makes it a pretty difficult proposition today. But in the meantime, we're still trying to figure out how we are going to reduce our carbon. We just started a pilot with this startup called Hullbot, which is this cute little scrubby bot in the middle there that helps keep our hulls clean from fouling. Usually our vessels are in the water for 5 years in between dry dock cycles. You can imagine what one of our hulls looks like after 5 years. And there are varying estimates of how much efficiency we lose as our hulls get more and more fouled. So the premise here is that once a boat comes out of dry dock, we use these little guys to keep our clean hulls clean and prevent them from losing the efficiency that we traditionally have. We're just in the middle of that now, so I don't know how well it's going to work. But the younger crew members are definitely pretty excited about it. This last one on the right, this is not anytime in the next couple of years, but especially for the times of the year when it's harder to find fish. 100-meter vessels are not the best tools for going out and looking all over the Bering Sea or Pacific Northwest coast for fish. So we're starting to look at unmanned surface vehicles that could be outfitted with fish finders to sort of make that whole proposition a little bit more efficient. Sometimes we get this question right at the beginning, and other times we don't get this question at all. But I certainly think about the way that we approach sustainability as being very dependent on people, both the people that run the company, but even more so the people that are on the vessels working 12, 14, 16-hour shifts for 3 months at a time in the middle of the Bering Sea in February. This gets back to that, ESG, CSR, sustainability Venn diagram of, what fits where, but crew really are our most valuable resource. And as you might expect, the makeup of our office looks a little bit different than the makeup of our vessel crew. We last year, I think we had 48 or 49 different nationalities represented on the vessels. A single boat could have 20 different nationalities, ethnicities, etc. We have a large African Muslim population. So if we think about the galleys again, we have to be able to keep all the different types of food separate. We have to offer a space for prayers, things that you wouldn't necessarily think about on a fishing boat, but are actually really important for our company and the way that we operate. And as I mentioned before, so many times when you hear stories about the seafood industry in the news, it's about, this plant that's using slaves in China, or this tuna company that held people hostage in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Luckily, again, we operate in an environment where we don't have those issues, but we realize that people are not working 9 to 5 on our boats. They're not getting paid overtime after 40 hours. They're not getting weekends off. So we really needed a program that recognized the unique nature of sort of offshore fishing operations, where you're out at sea for 2 weeks at a time, you're in port for 24 hours, and then you go do it again, and you wash, rinse, repeat, over the course of 3 months or 6 months. So this sort of governs how we recruit, how we pay, how we provide benefits. The last couple of years with Starlink have been really great. We've gotten much higher speed internet at much lower cost at sea, which has all sorts of trickle-down effects in terms of happier crew being able to connect with their families, not necessarily wanting to get off the boat because they don't know what's going on at home. All these, and yeah, they use up too much bandwidth for Netflix and all those other things, but that really has been a game changer for us. And just to wrap up a few things in terms of how we try to give back, and our sort of philanthropic program is really focused on the areas that we know and that we impact. So we're a big proponent of Sea Share. Sea Share is basically the nation's primary seafood provider to food banks. So we've donated to Sea Share for the last since its inception. I can't remember exactly when it was founded, but Alaska pollock is probably the primary seafood that goes through Sea Share, and that's not just American Seafoods, that's the whole pollock industry. We realize that we are a Seattle-based company that largely harvests resources in the area of Alaska, and that especially in Western Alaska, those communities are very remote. They are not blessed with resources in many cases. And so we have a number of grant programs that go directly on demand to a number of communities in Western Alaska. And maybe closer to home here, the catcher processor companies are all part of the Pollock Conservation Cooperative, which every year funds a common funding pool started with the University of Alaska, but now is also APU and NECTEC. And so this enables a dedicated professor and grad student funding for a number of different sort of research projects. These are the ones that have just been the last couple of years. So very timely, ones that everyone is thinking about trying to solve very difficult, complicated problems. Ugh, geez. So I will leave you with this question. Is it enough? That's it for me. Thank you all for coming. I'm happy to answer questions and have a beer with you afterwards if there's still beer available. Thank you. Yeah, in the back.
Thank you for this talk. Really interesting. I think it's cool to see all of this sort of the fish industry. It's kind of interesting how you brought up that those emissions, those problems with emissions, it goes across all food sectors. I'm curious as to, like, in regards to that, what do you think is the biggest thing food producers are trying to grasp? Like what sort of like information do they need? Because like from what you've told, you guys have these sort of different case studies where you're trying to like improve sustainability, whether with the fishing nets or the recycling things. So I guess just like in order to produce safe and sustainable seafood, what is that a lot of producers need to understand?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it sort of depends where you sit in the food industry. So, for example, we sell a lot of frozen fillets to Northern Europe that end up in grocery stores, in Germany and the UK, et cetera. And to give an example, there's a big frozen food company there called Nomad. So they're Bird's Eye Igloo and Findus and a few other brands that you might recognize in the frozen food section. Most of their carbon footprint comes from their suppliers, which are companies like us. So the only way that they can decarbonize is if their suppliers decarbonize. So that may look different for their frozen pea producer than it does for their Alaska pollock producer. For us to decarbonize, and there's a lot of pressure from Europe right now for companies to put pressure on their supply chains to have equivalent carbon commitments and reduction targets that they do, because that's the only way that a company like Nomad can actually meet their goals, and do it in line with the Paris Agreement through science-based targets or something like that. For us, that would mean reducing our carbon footprint 42% by 2030. And that's just terrifying. Like, I have no idea how we would do that, but we have a lot of pressure to make a commitment like that, so they can say that they're honoring their commitment. So yeah, I think it really depends. I think in the fishing industry, we're all sort of in a similar boat in that we want to do it and we're ready to do it, but we have pretty terrible or non-existent options for how we do it, and do it in a meaningful way, right? Like I can get 1% off of our carbon footprint probably pretty easily, but is that meaningful? Probably not. Would it make our buyers happy? Maybe. I don't know, but keep trying. Yeah, over here.
Yeah, so you talked to us about a whole bunch of different essentially dimensions of sustainability. I guess my question is, who is the audience for this? So as you think about doing your job, who's requiring or demanding this, each of these dimensions of sustainability? Who do you need to persuade, and what do they find convincing?
That is an excellent question. And one way I think about that is before, my position didn't exist before I was lucky enough to get it. But it's not like sustainability started when I arrived at American Seafoods. I mean, as smart and cool as I think I am, there was lots of great stuff going on at the company and in the industry before I even had heard of pollock. And there just wasn't somebody thinking about how to weave all these things into a coherent story. Then also, how do we push the envelope in the areas we haven't gotten started on yet? And so I would say 50% of my job is communication and telling our story to various stakeholders and audiences. And a lot of that is internal and trying to figure out, okay, how do we get logistics to think differently about how we move things around the earth? How do we get procurement to think differently about what we buy and where we buy it from and why is it so goddamn heavy? So that's a big piece of it. But then, to the point I was making before, a lot of the outward audience is Europe. I wish more of it was North America, but it's really not, at least from our customer base. It is really being driven by Europe. And the good thing is that gives me fuel for going back, excuse me, to my boss and my CFO and our logistics and our procurement people and say, listen, this is not a luxury. This is a cost of doing business, and we have to figure out how to do it in the most efficient way possible. Now, whether the net recycling and the short weighting, the packaging, like whether those are the right things, I don't know, but they're the things that we can get started on. And the same thing with some of the carbon and fuel stuff. It could be in 2 or 3 years that we have a strategy that looks totally different. And maybe it's driven by Europe, maybe it's driven by changing consumer attitudes, or what, I don't know. But I would say everyone needs to hear something a little bit differently, even if we're still really talking about the same thing. Yeah.
If I read one of your slides right where you're thinking about the efficiency, it looked like you were getting a little worse over the last few years. You were pumping the amount of carbon you had to invest for a unit carbon of return. You would larger.
We just got better at accounting. So we were including more categories of things. So we did our first carbon footprint in 2012. And it was mostly it was mostly for marketing, right? It was like, show how low our carbon is. And so they counted the fuel from the boats, and they counted the cargo fuel from Dutch Harbor. It's the first port of entry, and a few other things. And that was about it. They didn't include any trucking. They didn't include any crew travel. They didn't include groceries. They didn't include so it's like, it's gone up because we're just shining a light on more of the picture. And actually last year, it's interesting, last year, since it was such a bad hake year, our carbon footprint went down 10% in 2024. We didn't do anything different. We just caught less hake. So someone's like, we should put that at the top of the sustainability report. And I'm like, no, it'll be in there, but it's going to be on page 12. So yeah, like with financial accounting, there's part art and part science to it. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. It's really interesting. I was struck by your listing of fishing industry groups that have been sued for using the word sustainable. And was also thinking, I think it was this week, that Maine's lobster fishery has sued Seafood Watch for counter version of that. And I'm interested in, from a corporate perspective, what are sort of the risks and challenges with a lot of these sort of claims of sustainability being settled in courts instead of some other process that's sort of a little bit more predictable? I mean, is it?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Not to give you a cop-out kind of answer, but I think it depends on what type of company you are. So for the most part, like just using the example from here, most of the poly companies are B2B companies. So you're not going to see Trident and a few others aside, right? You're not going to see an American seafood product in Target. So for Gorton's and Bumblebee and those ones that do have identifiable brands, I can't speak firsthand, but I'd have to imagine they're pretty spooked. Because for 10 or 20 years, they've, a lot of them have invested in the MSC, for example, to say, all right, here's our insurance policy. And it turns out that that's not a blanket protection anymore. Now, I don't know the specifics of what language each of them were called out for. Sometimes it was sustainable, sometimes it was responsible, sometimes it was just, there's no way seafood from Russia could be certified or sustainable. And some of them were more labor related or quality related. So it does vary a little bit, but yeah, a number of them have been for using some type of sustainability language in advertising or on package that somebody thinks is basically a load of BS. I wouldn't like, we're not super worried about those specifically because again, our customers are the ones that are writing the words on the package or using certain advertising, and we're just the raw material provider. Yeah, right.
Take your American Seafoods hat off and put on your former environmental defense hat. How does your worldview change? Or has it really changed at all? Are the same issues you thought of back at environmental defense the same issues you're thinking about now?
I thought I knew a lot about fisheries when I worked at EDF. I think I knew a lot about certain aspects of fisheries. But in terms of how a management plan on a piece of paper turns into an operational plan for how we go out and maximize our quota for a given fishery, that obviously is totally different. And, I didn't work on climate or carbon at EDF. I didn't know anything about plastic or ESG or SBTI or any of those things. So I think the things that I was working on at EDF are not really material to my current role. And that's both a good thing and a bad thing. But I would say, at least here in the US, that we've got most of the bread and butter sustainability things figured out, the management, the science, all those sorts of things that are in the MSC principles, that are in the Seafood Watch principles. And, just looking at the NGO world that's doing fisheries conservation, they've all left the US, right? They're not trying to really invest a lot in improving US fisheries because the rate of return is getting slimmer and slimmer. So that's why you see everybody in Peru and Indonesia and Namibia and places like that. So I think that makes sense. I do lament a little bit that the NGOs that were doing good fisheries work in the US aren't really that present anymore. At least not at the levels that they were. So, that's both a good thing and a bad thing, I guess, right? Like they have to go where their funders want them to go, and they have to go where they think they can make a difference.
More questions out there? Or is it your time?
I'm thirsty.
No, let's go out and have